There's about a week and a half left before the Supreme Court wraps up its session this year. One of the major decisions left the court has to rule on is whether the Trump administration can add a question on citizenship to the 2020 census. At the same time, the House Oversight Committee has voted to hold Attorney General William Barr and Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt for not producing documents related to the citizenship question. The president has claimed executive privilege over those materials. That claim could end up in the courts. Kim Wehle warns that letting the courts decide on issues that belong to Congress and the voters could lead to unintended consequences. Kim is a CBS News legal analyst, and she joins me now from Washington. So, Kim, in your article, you explain that inaction by Congress has left a lot of important decisions in the hands of the Supreme Court. So what is behind this shift?
I think it's a broken Congress, a Congress that is allergic to compromise, allergic to coordinating with across the aisle, to making hard decisions. There seems to be this sense that if we do this, we're somehow losers or we're weak. And what happens then is that things like a definition of what's a national emergency, that is something Congress could amend the statute and give us a definition, would not have to go to the courts. Whether a citizenship question can be asked on the census, that could be put it to Congress. Congress could amend the law to make that really clear. Whether the president's acceptance of monies to his hotels for people staying there is it emoluments. That's actually expressed in the Constitution that needs to be authorized by Congress. There's a lot of things that Congress is just sitting back and not doing. And the problem is when something goes to the Supreme Court of the United States and the court decides it as a matter of constitutional law, it's as if the court is essentially amending the Constitution, and that is set in stone. Congress then can't go back and change its mind. We saw this with the Citizens United case having to do with money in politics. And the only way to change that kind of thing, if the court takes it and treats it as a constitutional question, is to amend the Constitution itself, which is a really laborious process.
So what then, with this going on, what are the implications for our democracy?
Well, the implications for our democracy is a steady aggrandizement of presidential power, which we're seeing, right? We've seen this not just under the Trump administration, but for many decades, and a Congress that's not doing its job of oversight. The Senate, in this instance, the Republican Senate, is just not made very clear it's not going to do any oversight of this president. And so then things go to the courts. And remember, the federal courts cannot be fired at the ballot box. Unlike state court judges, the framers of the Constitution decided we don't want them to be amenable to politics. But the problem with that is if we don't like what a federal judge is doing and the Supreme Court is doing, the voters can't take that piece of government back. We can't go to the ballot box and put a different judge in place. So what we're doing is essentially taking government out of the hands of individual voters and giving it to the president and to the federal judges. I talk about this in my book on the Constitution that hits the shelves next Tuesday.
Okay. Well, one point of contention between the Trump administration and House Democrats is the Justice Department's decision to include this question about citizenship on the 2020 census. So how do you think these judges or justices are going to rule on this issue?
Well, it looked like from the oral argument that the conservative justices were inclined to rule in favor of the administration. And one of the questions that was asked from the bench from Justice Kavanaugh was, wait a minute, if you have a problem with this, why don't, and this was actually, I think, to the House lawyer that was given time on behalf of Nancy Pelosi to speak to the justices. And the question was, if you have a problem with this question, why don't you amend the statute to say it's not acceptable? I think most legal scholars would say as a matter of statutory law that it's probably not a very strong case on behalf of the Trump administration. That is, they have to give really good reasons to do this, and the argument is I think they haven't. That's what a lot of scholars have said. Then, of course, there's the big constitutional question. And today we had a lower court judge say there's some question as to the real rationale behind the census addition of the citizenship question, and that could throw a monkey wrench in the entire process. We'll just have to see how it goes.
Wow, political polarization creeping into all different areas of our lives. In your article, you also describe two of the three branches of government as broken. So how are they broken, and what should the three branches of government operate like in a perfect world?
Well, in a perfect world, the framers of the Constitution fought, the Revolutionary War because they didn't want a monarch. So what they did is they broke a monarchy into three parts. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and we have the judicial branch, and each branch gets checked by the other two branches. When I say it's broken, Congress is not doing its oversight job. As I said, the Senate isn't checking this presidency, and the House has been sort of feckless even in doing oversight now that the Democrats are in charge. We have the judicial branch that's functioning, although there's a lot of talk about highly politicized judges being put on that bench, which is really a problem. And then, of course, we have this executive branch mired in controversy with the 449-page Mueller report hanging over its head and the prospect of impeachment, which just is, if nothing else, is a huge distraction in the work of the executive branch. So I think the answer really is the old-fashioned answer. In 2020, people need to go to the polls. In the November 2018 election, where the House went from Republican to Democratic control, 49% of the voters came out. If that number were higher to 90%, as it is like in Australia, where it's mandatory to vote, I think we'd see the kind of change in America that people are really wanting.
All right. Very interesting. Kim Wehle, thanks so much.
Thank you, Don.